So all you still single niggas to hurry up and get married. Y'all still here with me? We still in the same couch. For 3 on this pod that can even play around with that. The rest of y'all need to just keep it quiet.
And then it's you.
So that they don't stop wasting time. Go get married. If y'all continuously bring up something that I don't ever mention, how am I being defensive about it?
Emanny criticizes Ice and Joe Budden for their single status. Indeed, the recently published episode presented an intriguing reconciliation of each man's relationship status with his significant other. The scene begins with Emanny being ridiculed and criticized for being unmarried. Yes, exactly. Due to the fact that he is single, Emanny is portrayed as somewhat of a man who lacks self-control. However, Emanny begins to retaliate, emphasizing that only Parks, Mark, and Flip are married. Many people on the program, especially Ice and Joe, become easily offended as a result.
Back at ain't married yet, but there's a step between marriage and where you are.
Joe's refusal to marry his girlfriend is one of the show's most shocking revelations. Every other episode, Joe talks about getting married to his girl, but it hasn't happened. The same is true with Ice, who always talks about his partner, also known as the missing piece. However, since he never actually talks about it or gives lip service to it, the concept of them getting married just doesn't feel as solid. Emanny asked, "Why am I being portrayed as the guy with Peter Pan syndrome and accused of never making a serious woman out of the girls that I date?" And that's when everything started to happen. However, what about you all? You too are in a similar situation. Even though you two are only dating, nobody has a ring on their finger. But my, did the gaslight guns come out as Emanny opened fire. The phony married people began berating Emanny for becoming emotional right away.
Mine is, when I get to rebuttal, people look at me like I'm crazy for the rebuttal.
But why you want to rebuttal for, though?
Because I want to buy
But you respond to shit like a single nigga, man. Look at you.
And y'all, do y'all want to tell me what y'all respond like?
Now, as people are becoming sensitive, the show uses that strategy, which is frequent with gaslighters. When you try to arouse someone, they label you sensitive. The entire cast, not just Joe and Ice, as I saw Mark, Flip, and Parks, began to act as if they were attempting to confront Emanny, saying things like, "Yo, you shouldn't be going there." Given what Joe and Ice were making fun of him for, it seemed absurd that he stated that. I mean, Ice appeared to be much more irritated than I had expected, given that I assumed he was getting married soon, but he simply appeared agitated throughout the entire exchange. I asked myself, is everything cool? Because why does everyone appear so worried if this is the only content over everything? The whole back and forth with everyone supporting Emanny also drew some criticism from the fans. Joe and Ice don't really have anything to stand on, and Emanny's right was mentioned in 95% of the comments as I witnessed. With this back and forth, some even claim Emanny won Potter of the Month. I assume that Joe and Ice were rather worried that their girl would see this video and start to feel something. I am aware, however, that Joe has acknowledged that his girlfriend watches every episode of the pod, and even has friends who visit her to share what transpired on the show. I therefore believe that he is saying, damn, this is going to go out. This is not good. Many would argue that Joe would have edited the passage out if he were truly offended. However, I believe that contradicts Joe's moral principles as a creator, which is why he included it. Additionally, if Joe simply cuts it off as the show's members begin to get into their bags, it would likely depress morale. It would appear absurd on Joe's part. He simply cut it the one time he kind of got one-ended or one-upped by someone. However, we must keep an eye on things to see whether the guest brought up this particular issue. I wonder if Ice and Joe are thinking, damn, we took it there and he took it further because Emanny went there. Perhaps I was able to observe myself. What if Ice harbors resentment? I don't want you to go there, for example. I will now appear insane when I return home. Because you have to keep in mind that the show's snippets are frequently not what make the show. It's the real response to the program. Thus, others who watch the video on Twitter may cite it, repost it, and say something like, yeah, Joe and Joe aren't even marrying his girl. Ice isn't even getting married to his girl. Since the information isn't official, they better quit discussing it. After those women see those items, their homes begin to get disorganized. And I believe that's what's happening in this instance. Since Joe's girl has been acting like Omar on The Wire, evidently taking offense at everyone who makes fun of their relationship, we also need to examine some intriguing scenarios that have emerged on the murky streets of Twitter. For those of you who don't recall, Joe and his girlfriend went on a trip abroad, and many people believe that was the time she would tie the knot. But that never came to pass. And I shared a video of LeBron James leaving the court in the finals against the Warriors after realizing he wouldn't win a title.
James congratulating some of the Warriors and will get a standing ovation
here at Quicken Loans Arena.
And that greatly offended her. Now, it seemed like a meme to me. It was a joke. On this broadcast, it was a topic of discussion. I therefore didn't think it was a huge deal, but to her, it was. And occasionally, I question why. I don't like it because many people will respond, I don't care when you do this content thing. This is irrelevant. I'm not offended by this. It is all positive. I don't give a damn. I'm going to do it myself at the end of the day. However, their behavior would imply that they are much disturbed by online rumors and content that appears on the show, but is presented as plot points. But in reality, it's upending individuals from the bottom up. However, another possibility also emerged on Sunday. At one point, Joe's girls seemed to be criticizing a member of the Joe Budden Spaces community for constantly showing up at Joe's places. But she later left and returned, acting as though nothing had happened. And I believe that she wasn't really upset about her return. I believe she was resentful of this specific fan's constant presence in Joe's space. The person who co-hosted was she. The person Joe heavily platformed was her. And I'm not sure if the attention caused her to feel anything. It appeared to be a harmless Twitter space dynamic to me. Even though I thought it was strange, Joe continued to co-host with this individual. I believe he simply enjoyed the way she used Twitter, but that individual would eventually stop listening to the podcast, visit the Rory Mall community, the Hot and Bothered community, and then return to the Joe Budden community, apparently in an attempt to gain more followers or another platform. However, that fury in his girl led to the current circumstance, which I'm not sure anyone could even make fun of. I'm not sure if anyone could, as I would assume that if this is that serious for someone, they shouldn't bring it up on the pod anymore. Do not discuss it with anyone. Make sure it doesn't come up on the radio if it's nobody's business. But if Joe discusses other people's dynamics and relationships, only time will tell that might detract from the show's inventiveness. Tell me your thoughts. Do you think Emanny raised some valid points? Even if it is discussed on the broadcast, do you think it is nobody's business? Man, you know how I do. If women and children aren't mentioned on the show, I believe that they shouldn't be talked about. However, it is nearly impossible to avoid discussing them if they are brought up in the show's plot. It is extremely unlikely. I'm aware. The ancient street laws apply to us. In fact, that is the origin of the issue with women and children. The ladies and children fighting on the streets are not to be touched. The streets, however, aren't content. Each person is mentally drawing their own invisible lines. Furthermore, the actors themselves frequently transgress those boundaries when discussing other individuals, don't they? Joe has discussed the interactions people have had with their children. Joe has discussed the marriages of other people. The rest of the cast is in the same boat. Therefore, it's challenging for content creators like me to avoid discussing certain topics, because doing so gives the impression that you're allowing an unseen law to dictate what you publish. And the law states that not even Joe Budden Podcast has a subscription. It's a law that only those living on the streets actually follow because, well, it's some kind of old-fashioned belief that women and children shouldn't participate because they're unrelated. However, the appropriate analogy for this would be if someone used their women and children to support their operations on the streets. Indeed, the street code would then incorporate women and children. And I believe the podcast is experiencing the same issue. You can attempt to be, yes, they say. I'm not really going to talk about the women and children in their lives. I see a lot of individuals in my field who create content similar to mine. Actually, it's the woman. But it seems biased to me because it doesn't make sense if the ladies are a part of the show's plot. I take it that there are pod wives? All of them are characters now. You might not want to introduce them if they weren't characters. But now that the secret has been revealed, Pandora's box has been opened, and now there are several hazy boundaries that showcast members might use against future writers like me to energize their fan base and portray the authors as crazy for discussing those dynamics. However, please share your thoughts on this with me. I go into great detail about it on my Patreon, especially Joe Biden's girl pressing a fan on Twitter. As you know, even though I thought that was absurd, it came to pass. And I suppose that's the way things are. Okay, everyone.